Welcome to Breaking with Tradition, a new Catalyst podcast where we follow in the footsteps of our founder, Felice Schwartz, and sit down with change-making leaders and professionals accelerating diversity, equity, and inclusion in today's global workplace.
Founded in 1962, Catalyst drives change with unparalleled thought leadership, actionable solutions, and a galvanized community of multinational corporations to accelerate and advance women into leadership. Because progress for women is progress for everyone. We're your hosts. My name is Lucy Cullen.
I'm Victoria Kuketz.
And I'm Erin Souza Resendiz. And we're three Catalystas that live in different regions around the globe. We're united by one goal: to create workplaces where anyone can thrive, regardless of their identity.
Hi, I'm your host, Victoria Kuketz, and today I'm chatting with Janet Coe, President and co-founder of the Menopause Foundation of Canada. Janet, do you want to say hi to all of our guests?
Delighted to be here with you. Thanks for talking about menopause today.
Thanks so much for being here with us. So today we're here to discuss a topic that's been long overlooked, but it's now coming to the forefront of workplace conversations, and that's menopause. There's been some groundbreaking research done by the Menopause Foundation of Canada on the staggering impact of the unmanaged symptoms of menopause on employers and on women's earning potential. Catalyst has also started releasing research of its own that aligns with much of what the foundation is sharing on a global scale. But before we dive in, let's get to know you better, Janet. I'd love to hear a little bit about yourself and also what led you to the foundation.
Well, like many people who start these things, what led me here was my own personal story. So at the height of my professional career as a senior vice president of communications, working in a very large organization on a member of the executive management team, I started to have these symptoms that I had no idea were connected with the menopause transition because I had never heard of the word perimenopause. So joint pain, body aches, brain fog, heart palpitations, night sweats. These are things that maybe some women could connect the dots on, but I couldn't. At the height of my career, I actually stepped away because I thought I was burnt out. It took a long and winding path to finding health and wellness. And once I realized that what I had experienced was hormonal change related to that menopause journey, and when I finally did get myself on some treatment and realized quite quickly how great I felt after receiving that treatment, it was this path of discovery that made me realize that many women were suffering in silence. And together with co-founder Trish Barbado, who had her own challenging menopause journey, she was a former colleague and friend, we really felt that menopause was a health equality issue and an age and gender equality issue. So we launched the Menopause Foundation of Canada in 2022 as the country's first national nonprofit advocacy organization dedicated to raising awareness of the impact of menopause, not only on women, but on society as well.
Thanks so much for sharing your powerful story and for the work that you're doing today. It's so interesting to hear about so many of the symptoms being mysterious and unknown, and really the path that you had to go through to understand what was going on and really have that greater sense of awareness. One thing that I really appreciated about our briefing call was how we started talking about the connection to taboos in the workplace and how I think a lot of the mystery and a lot of the stigma around menopause is really tied to that issue. So where I want to start out today is really looking at how workplaces have begun to foster connections about historically taboo subjects like mental health and burnout. But menopause, a life transition that affects millions of employees, many at senior leadership levels, as you explained, remains highly stigmatized. So why do you think menopause has historically been such a taboo subject in workplaces? And how is that changing today?
Well, I'd say it's been a taboo subject, not just in workplaces, but everywhere. So I think one of the significant reasons driving that is the reality of ageism that disproportionately has a negative impact on women. So women, as we get older, there's this view that we're in a stage of decline. That doesn't happen to men necessarily. Of course, they're impacted by ageism too, but in a very different way. Men may develop gravitas, that label of wisdom and expertise isn't always associated with women in the prime of their life. So I think it's been this ageism and this stigma around menopause, the negative stereotype of it, which has kept this conversation really in the dark. And it's one of the major reasons why women have been left to unravel this mystery on their own. And that certainly is changing from a workplace context, because as organizations focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, looking at how they can retain top talent, supporting women to break through the glass ceiling, you cannot consider those factors without looking at supporting women at this stage of life in the prime of their career.
It's so interesting how you touch on like the intersectional and compounding biases that women are experiencing as they start to go through menopause. So that's already issues of representation in the workplace, ageism, and other biases like that. Catalyst has actually been doing some research that's going to be forthcoming quite soon. And so we have some pretty staggering data points ourselves. We actually put out a survey of 2,900 full-time employees from across 8 different countries that asked asked really the question of how prevalent menopause stigma is in the workplace. And so our numbers have come back and they're quite shocking. So what we learned is that 72% of those surveyed have hidden their menopausal symptoms at work at least once. 36% perceive a stigma against talking about menopause in the workplace, and 34% have not told anybody at work about their symptoms. And so this is, as you mentioned, quite a bit of suffering in silence. And so I want to dig into the experience a little bit more. As we were talking about before, menopause looks different for every woman. So I'm just wondering, what are some common experiences, but then what are some myths that you'd like to bust as well?
There are so many myths, and it's true that menopause, while it's a universal experience, it is a unique journey for each person that goes through it. So one of the things we have to recognize is that not every woman experiences the same kind of symptoms. We know that about 20% of women so-called sail through their menopause journey with very few symptoms, but 3 out of 4 women report symptoms that interfere with their daily lives. And certainly our data really corroborates the data that you just shared with respect to women hiding their symptoms, feeling like by disclosing their symptoms that they may be passed up for job opportunities, which feeds into that narrative we discussed off the top about this being a period of ageism that women have to encounter in the workplace and beyond. The myths that I would like to break, though, are some of the big ones, that menopause is something that happens to you when you're so-called older. The average age to reach menopause in Canada is 51, but most women enter menopause between the ages of 45 and 55. And perimenopause lasts anywhere from 2 to 10 years prior to that. So it's not uncommon or unheard of for women in their 30s, definitely their early 40s, to be experiencing perimenopausal symptoms. And another myth that I would love to break is that menopause is about period changes, hot flashes, and the end of your reproductive life. While that is true, focusing on just those things really does women this tremendous disservice, and it keeps us all in the dark about what menopause truly is, which is this profound hormonal shift that happens in midlife that can impact every organ in your body, because we have estrogen receptors all over our body. So there's some 30 plus symptoms of menopause that a woman may experience. This should be viewed through the lens of health, longevity, and that's where the conversation needs to move. We shouldn't be trivializing this time of life, making jokes about people's health, their symptoms, and their lifespan. I think another myth that needs to be broken is that while menopause is a natural phase of life, suffering through it is something that people don't need to endure. And there are certainly many, many things that women can do to ensure that their health is optimal at this stage of life. Lifestyle changes, certainly healthy habits, and up to and including all kinds of options for medication and treatment to live your best life in your menopausal years. You're going to hear me say that a lot because I'm hoping that we can change the narrative in our conversation from menopause being something that you don't look forward to shifting it to something that's very positive, an important milestone where we recognize and honor women for stepping into the peak of their lives, where they have the most wisdom, experience, and contributions to make.
I love how you're reframing the narrative to really be one about perseverance and resilience and self knowledge. I think as well. What I really appreciate about much of the work that you're doing is you're really filling that menopause knowledge gap, and I think empowering people to have better self reflection and awareness, and really understand what's going on with their bodies and give themselves more grace. I think another really interesting data point that I came across in your work is that half of women's lives are in a menopausal state. That's something that never really occurred to me before when it comes to perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause itself. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about that.
That is another myth that we should break. This myth that you somehow get through menopause, get through to this mythical other side that actually doesn't exist. We will spend up to half of our life in a stage of menopause, because menopause is one day. It's 12 months of being period free, but then you have that perimenopause stage, which can last up to 10 years before your final period. And then you're in postmenopause. And many people think that your symptoms will just disappear at that point, but that's not true. For most women, symptoms will start to dissipate several years after they reach menopause. And then for some women, you may still have hot flashes into your 60s, 70s, and beyond. And you're at increased risk for heart disease, osteoporosis, and something that gets very little discussion, the genitourinary syndrome of menopause, which is all about your genitourinary and your sexual health. We talk a lot about men's sexual vitality, and that's not a taboo topic anymore. There's all kinds of commercials about things that men can do. But for women, this is still a secretive topic. So yes, we will be in a menopausal state for a significant portion of our lives. And it's about time that we empower ourselves with knowledge, which I think is happening thanks to Generation X. Gen X women will be the last women to be in the dark about menopause. And we know that the millennials and the generations after us, their expectations of an experience at work, of an experience with a healthcare provider, their openness and willingness to share is quite different from previous generations. So we are going to definitely see a change, as we know is happening right now, because menopause is a hot topic and it's turned into a movement.
I love that it's turned into a movement. And I think to your point, more open workplaces are really a more trustworthy workplaces, right? And this is where women can really start to disclose what's going on and feel comfortable in doing so, and feel that there won't be that ageism or those intersectional prejudices that we talked about. I think one other really interesting thing for me is looking at this through the lens of health equity, as you mentioned earlier. So, in addition to what you've shared, I'm just wondering, how can women be a little bit more proactive, knowing that this is going to be half of their lifetime after hearing this podcast and digging into your work some more, rather than reactive, which is what so much of how our health systems and other systems are designed?
Well, unlike other times in a woman's life, if you think about, we get support to go through puberty, there's coming of age stories, there's education at school. We get help to not get pregnant, to get pregnant, to have children, to go through things like postpartum depression, to reintegrate into the workforce. None of that is perfect, but it does exist. When it comes to perimenopause, menopause, and beyond, that stage of a woman's life has largely been overlooked and ignored. So women are at a disadvantage where we have to do the work. We have to arm ourselves with knowledge. Knowledge is power. So we must look for evidence-based sources of information about the menopause journey and transition. We shouldn't fear it. Just like other stages of life, the more we know, the more we can prepare, the more we can be ready to take action, because women want to thrive. They want to live their best life, and they deserve to do that. But at this stage of life, it does mean that you must become up to speed on some of these things. We've got great resources on our website, menopausefoundationcanada.ca. We're very evidence-based, guided by a medical advisory board of the top menopause specialists in the country, and linking to only evidence-based sources of information. So that's the starting point. And I can tell you, in terms of the movement, it is women who are demanding better care, women who are demanding a change in the conversation and the narrative. And because of our very large numbers, 10 million over the age of 40 in Canada, quarter of the workforce, we are seeing employers really step up to support women in the prime of their lives. So it's a really exciting opportunity that we're at right now.
Thank you for that. And I've actually been digging into your resources quite a bit and looking at the symptom tracker and looking at the employer playbook. So I'm excited to get into all of that as well. But since you started talking about business and industry, I think that's where we should go next. So the foundation talks about the economic and business impact of the menopause stigma, especially on women's earning potential and career trajectories. Can you break that down for us a little bit more?
Sure. And, Victoria, something that we did when we started the foundation, we knew it wouldn't be enough for us to just share women's stories and experiences, that if we wanted to have a legitimate conversation that would drive change, we needed data, and there was no Canadian data. So we set out to create these landmark reports, our Canadian data from Menopause and Work in Canada. We conducted with Deloitte an economic impact analysis of the unmanaged symptoms of menopause, which came out to be a staggering $3.5 billion annually economic impact to the Canadian economy. That, breaks out into 540,000 missed days of work, more than $230 million annually of lost productivity. And the part of the story that doesn't get a lot of attention, it really hits home for me because this is part of my story, is that $3.2 billion portion of that number is women themselves losing income in their peak earning years. So, you have to recognize that menopause intersects with that critical career stage between the ages of 45 and 55, where women are assuming greater leadership roles. And if you do not understand the changes that are happening to you and you're struggling with symptoms and you can't connect the dots, and then you go to your healthcare provider and they're also not trained or prepared to offer you support, you can have, years of struggling and not being at your best. So this is one of the reasons why we're really focused on the workplace, because we know employers will step up and help to close that knowledge gap, because women over the age of 40, and particularly that 45 to 55 age group, which is the fastest growing cohort of working women in our country. Employers cannot afford to lose their expertise, their wisdom, their leadership, their knowledge. So again, I see this as just like this incredibly exciting opportunity to have that conversation and for Canada to lead the way.
Absolutely. I think the data around the economic impact is staggering. And I've actually heard this group of women referred to as the lost cohort. And so when we think about the subject matter expertise, the leadership, the capability, all of these things that due to this lack of knowledge and due to lack of support is just flowing out of corporate Canada, it's really eye-opening. So I think with that in mind, let's talk about what you can suggest that an employer does as a first step to help employees going through menopause. And what does a menopause inclusive workplace really look like?
Well, we created, to support employers, we launched a campaign called Menopause Works Here. And we created a menopause inclusive workplace playbook, which included 5 easy steps for workplaces to follow, because we wanted to provide them with a solution. It's free to join the campaign. It's free to download these resources. And the 5-step campaign, and one of the first things that employers can do, which isn't a heavy lift, is to break the conversation, change your culture and your communications, really focusing on normalizing this topic. We're very fortunate. We've had more than 50 companies join the campaign. Sun Life was the first organization that joined. Their leadership really stepped up to recognize that they had a number of employees at this stage of life, that this was an age and gender equality issue, and to really break down those barriers and taboos. And then they've done something really incredible, which is share those resources with the organizations that they support. Other companies like PwC, again, leadership starting at the top. They held events with their CEO, with their chief operating officer, really demonstrating to their workforce that menopause works here, that they want to support women in their prime. They've created monthly menopause circles where people can come and share their stories, try to get support from each other. So starting the conversation, normalizing menopause at work, breaking the taboo, I think is the first step that employers can take. But there's many more. Our playbook goes into really reviewing your benefits, making sure that it's comprehensive, making sure that it covers menopause hormone therapy, new treatment options that are available and on the horizon, and really expanding this to be more holistic. Women at this stage of life can really benefit from pelvic floor physiotherapy. There's a number of mental health challenges that women can encounter: low mood, anxiety. If you're a woman who was predisposed to having depression earlier in your life, if you had a postpartum depression, you're at increased risk for depression. That knowledge can be very powerful. And if you have a benefits plan that supports things like cognitive behavioral therapy, which can be very helpful, all of those things really support somebody at this stage of life. Reasonable accommodations, looking at your policies, all of those things can make a big difference. And women are really just looking for some openness in the workplace, some respect for what they're experiencing, greater flexibility and choice as they go through this.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. So what I'm hearing is that companies just really have to address this menopause stigma. They have to raise awareness about it and support their employees. And in turn, we can all become more informed, take greater responsibility, empower ourselves and others, and then really leverage the opportunities of empowering and supporting all these incredible women across corporate Canada and the globe, really. So thank you for that. I do have one last question for you. And I think, since we started with the personal, I'd love to end that way as well. Our podcast is called Breaking with Tradition, which is a nod to our founder, Felice Schwartz, who is a non-traditionalist and quite a trailblazer as well. So I'm wondering if you can tell us about a moment when you broke with tradition at work.
I might flip this a little bit. I love the idea of breaking with tradition, but I also love creating new traditions. And I think
I like that.
we as women have an opportunity to create a new tradition when it comes to menopause, because there is so much shame and stigma and judgment. There's judgment around, oh, you need some support. Well, I got through it and I was fine. Or you're not doing something about it. You really should. I think this is an opportunity for us to really, as women, have each other's backs fully and completely, and to show up that way at work without fear of being dismissed, really champion each other and this stage of life. I think that would set a new tone in the workplace and in society overall, where we're not feeding into societal narratives or norms about what this stage of life should look like. We're just honoring everybody's unique journey, because I truly believe that menopause is a disruptor in a woman's life. It's a great moment for you to take a breath, to prioritize yourself, to reflect on who you are and who you want to be. Women end up doing amazing things in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. We just have to make sure that our health is there to allow us to achieve that. So there you have it.
That is such a powerful call to action. Thank you so much, Janet. So let's do exactly that. Let's reframe the narrative. Let's empower ourselves, and let's create a whole new culture around menopause at work. This has been such an inspiring and motivating conversation. I feel like my eyes have been opened, and I'll definitely continue to be an ambassador and champion of your work. So thank you so much for coming on the show today, Janet.
Thank you. Thank you for having the discussion.
And thanks to our listeners for tuning into Breaking with Tradition. We'll see you next time.
If you like what you heard today, be sure to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen, watch on YouTube, or find us on catalyst.org/podcast.